Chapter 25. Curdie comes to grief. Everything was, for some time above ground, quiet. The king was still away in a distant part of his domain. The men-at-arms kept watch about the house. They had been considerably astonished by finding at the foot of the rock in the garden the hideous body of the goblin creature killed by Curdie, but they came to the conclusion that it had been slain in the mines and had only crept out there to die. And except for the occasional glance of a live one, they saw nothing to cause them any alarm. Curdie kept watch in the mountain, and the goblins kept burrowing deeper into the earth. As long as they went deeper, there was, Curdie judged, no imminent danger. To Irene, the summer was as filled with pleasure as ever, and for a long time, although she often did think of her grandmother during the day, and often dreamed of her at night, she did not see her. The kids and the flowers were as much to her delight as ever, and she made as much friendship with the miners' children she met on the Mountie as Lootie would permit. But Lootie had a very foolish notion concerning the dignity of a princess, not understanding that the truest princess is just the one who loves all her brothers and sisters best, and who is able to do the most good for them by being humble towards them. At the same time, she was considerably altered for the better in her behaviour towards the princess. She could not help seeing that she was no longer a mere child, but wiser than her age would account for. She kept foolishly whispering to the servants, however, sometimes that the princess was not in her right mind, sometimes that she was too good to live, and other such nonsense of the same sort. All this time, Curdie had to be sorry, without a chance of confessing, that he had behaved so unkindly to the princess. It perhaps made him more diligent in his endeavours to serve her. His mother and he would often talk about the subject, and she comforted him and told him that surely some day he would have the opportunity he so much desired. I should like to remark, for the sake of the princes and princess in general, that it is a low and contemptible thing to refuse to confess a fault, or even an error. If a true princess has ever done wrong, she is always uneasy until she has had the opportunity of throwing the wrongness away from her by saying, "I did it, and I wish I had not, and I am sorry for having done it." So you see, there is something in supposing that Curdie was not only a miner, but also something of a prince as well. There have been many such instances known to the world's history. At length, however, he began to see signs of a change in the proceedings of the goblin excavators. They were going no deeper, but had continued running on a level, and he watched them, therefore, more closely than ever. All at once, one night, coming to a slope of very hard rock, they had begun to ascend along the inclined plane surface of it. Having reached its top, they went again on a level for a night or two, after which they began to ascend once more, and keeping at a pretty steep angle. At length, Curdie judged it was time to transfer his observations to another quarter, and the next night he did not go to the mines at all, but leaving his pickaxe and clue at home, and taking only his usual lump of bread and pease pudding, he went down the mountain to the king's house. He climbed over the wall, and remained in the garden the whole night, creeping on hands and knees from spot to spot, or lying full length with his ear to the ground, listening. But he heard nothing except the tread of the men-at-arms as they marched around, whose observances, as the night was cloudy and there was no moon, he had little difficulty in avoiding. For several nights he continued to haunt the gardens and listen, but with no success. At length, early one evening, whether he had gotten careless of his own safety, or that the growing moon had become strong enough to expose him, his watch came to a sudden halt. He was creeping out from behind the rock from which the stream ran out, for he had been listening all around in the hope it might convey to his ears some indication of the whereabouts of the goblin miners, when he just came into the moonlight of the lawn. A whiz in his ear and a blow upon his leg startled him. He instantly squatted in hope of eluding further notice, but when he heard the sound of running feet, he jumped up, trying to take the chance to escape by flight. He fell, however, when a shooting pain shot all through him, for a bolt of a crossbow had wounded his leg, and blood was now streaming from it. He was instantly laid hold of by 2 or 3 of the men-at-arms. It was useless to struggle, and he submitted in silence. "It's a boy!" cried several of them all at once, in a tone of amazement. "I thought it was one of those demons." "What are you about here?" "Going to have a little rough usage, apparently," said Curdie, laughing as the men shook him. "Impudence will do you no good. You have no business being in the king's ground, and if you don't give us a true account of yourself, you shall fare as a thief." "Why, what else should he be?" said one. "He might have been after a lost kid, you know," suggested another. "There's no good trying to excuse him. He has no business here anyhow." "Let me go away then, if you please," said Curdie. "But we do not please. Not except that you give a good account of yourselves." "I don't quite feel that I am sure whether I can trust you," said Curdie. "We are the king's own men-at-arms," said the captain courteously, for he was much taken with Curdie's appearance and courage. "Well, I will tell you about it, but you must promise to listen to me and not to do anything rash." "I call that cool," said one of the men, laughing. "He will tell us what mischief he's about, if we promise to do as he pleases." "I was about no mischief," said Curdie. But ere he could say more, he turned faint and fell senseless on the grass. They then first discovered that the bolt they had shot, taking him for one of the goblin creatures, had wounded him. They carried him into the house and laid him down in the hall. Reports spread that they had caught a robber, and the servants came crowding in to see the villain. Among the rest came the nurse. The moment she saw him, she exclaimed with indignation, "I declare it is that young rascal of a miner who was so rude to me and the princess on the mountain. He actually wanted to kiss the princess. Oh, I took care of that, the wretch. And he was prowling about, was he? Oh, the impudence." The princess being fast asleep, she could misrepresent at her pleasure. When he heard this, the captain of the guard, though he had considerable doubt as to the truth of it, resolved to keep Curdie a prisoner till he could search out this affair. So, after they had brought him round a little and attended his wound, which was rather a bad one, they laid him, still exhausted from the loss of blood, upon a mattress in a disused room, one of those so often already mentioned, and locked the door, and left him. He passed a troubled night, and in the morning they found him talking wildly. In the evening he came to himself, but felt very weak, and his leg was exceedingly painful. Wondering where he was, and seeing one of the men-at-arms in the room, he began to question him, and soon recalled the events of the preceding night. As he was himself unable to keep watch any more, he told the soldier all he knew about the goblins, and begged him to tell his companions, and to stir them up to watch with tenfold vigilance. But whether it was that he did not talk quite coherently, or that the whole thing appeared incredible, certainly the man concluded that Curdie was only raving still, and tried to coax him to hold his tongue. This, of course, annoyed Curdie dreadfully, who now felt in his turn what it was not to be believed, and in consequence of this his fever returned, and by the time when, at his persistent entreaties, the captain was called, there could be no doubt that he was raving. They did all they could, and promised him everything he wanted, but with no intention of fulfilment. At last he went to sleep, and when at length his sleep grew profound and peaceful, they left him, locked the door again, and withdrew, intending to revisit him early in the morning.